back again, this time with a tag. I have actually been tagged several times in the last month and a half or so. I just have not really been able to get around to doing any BookTube videos at all. So I'm going to try to get through as many of these tags as I can. The first one is the Historathon book tag, Ancient Cultures Edition, which was created by Jack over at the Rambling Raconteur in honor of Historathon, which is a reading event, a year-long reading event created by Vin over at Revenant Reads. And I'll have both their channels linked down in my description. And I was tagged by Vin. So the first prompt is the Romans. What books, writers, genres are your bread and circus? So for me, that would be erotica. I do read erotica every once in a great while, and mostly I read it when I just want to burn a book down really fast and not have to think about it too much, not have to look anything up, and not take notes. So my favorite erotica writer is Kitty Thomas, and I'll just show you three of my favorites by her. So the first one is Big Sky. This is by far and away the best book that she has written of those I've read. I've read about 15 of her books. This one really shows you what I think has to be a true-to-life Stockholm syndrome. This woman is kidnapped, and the kidnapper essentially through fear and manipulation is able to use her own desires against her and get her fouled up in her own mind so that she thinks that she's in love with him. And it just absolutely blew my mind. And I was reading this book with my jaw hanging open, thinking that though none of the sexual stuff is going to be in my realm of reality, the psychology that happens, what this man does to her, I could see how that could happen to me. It was pretty amazing. This is a really good book. Let's see. The next one is Comfort Food, which was similar to Big Sky in that this woman is kidnapped and she's sort of systematically broken down and becoming a willing slave to this man. And I thought this was so good. Not quite as good as Big Sky, but still it was really up there. The next one is Dark Night of the Soul, which didn't have any of the fantastic jaw-dropping psychology happening in the other two books, but the world she created here is by far and away the best world building she's done in any of the books of hers that I've read. And this one is where this is some far future Earth where some natural calamity is happening, or has happened rather, and Earth, instead of having a 24-day cycle, now has a 6-month cycle. So there's 3 months of daylight and then there's 3 months of night. And the world, the human population is scattered and drastically dwindled. And it has been broken down into individual city-states, and each city-state is ruled by a vampire. So I thought that this was like a really cool world that she had built and a really interesting premise for a book. So that's why this ranks up in my favorites of hers. Let's see. The next prompt is the Sumerians. What is a work you read many years ago but still appreciate? Well, that is The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne. This is one of my favorite books that I have ever read. I have 2 editions here. I'll just show you both. But yeah, I read this in high school, and I actually wrote my thesis on this book, and I absolutely love it. I have not reread it in many years. I should reread this, but absolutely wonderful. The characters in this book broke my heart and gave me hope. And I was 17 when I read it, so it had a pretty profound effect on me. The next prompt is the Shang. What is your favorite non-example to pillory? I had to think about that one for a moment. I have to admit this tag was just slightly smarter than I am. But I eventually settled on Jaws by Peter Benchley. I absolutely hated this book. I hated it so much. I just hated it. The level of social prejudice happening in this book is crazy. I can't believe nobody ever talks about that. The sexism is... I'm not usually bothered by misogyny and sexism in older books. It's just not something I care about. It's not something I dwell on. I just move along, you know what I mean, and ignore it. But in this book, it was so bad. It was so bad. It was absolutely terrible. I did a whole rant. I could just literally rant and rant and rant about this book. So it's like one of the few books, actually the only maybe three books that I can even think of that ever actually made me angry. Yeah, the misogyny and sexism is just crazy. Plus there's, there's bigotry, there's a dash of racism, there's a dash of anti-Semitism. It's a whole thing. Like everything is in this book. Every social prejudice is in this book. Hated it. The only good thing about it was the shark. And you barely see the shark in this. It makes a couple of appearances that only last like a page or two. And then he's in like the last 45 to 50 pages of the book. And that's all the shark you get in the entire book. And then there's this whole long, drawn out thing with the mayor being part of the mob and all this business. It's stupid. It was not good. The next prompt is early Basketmaker. Name an early work that points the way to later monuments. So I don't know that Grady Hendrix has written a book that you can consider a monument. However, I like him because he's one of my favorite authors, and also he is the easy example that I could pull off of my shelf. So he's written a number of books now, and in his this is a book that I read that was one of his first books. It was originally called Occupy Space, and then in the last couple of years he sort of rebranded it and retitled it, and now it's called Bad Astronauts. I would say this is much better, the cover and the title, I mean. But it's a story about this retired astronaut who never went to space, and his nephew is stuck on a space station or spaceship out in space, and they can't figure out how to rescue him, and he's going to die. So he gets his entire town to help him build a rocket that he then launches into space to try to rescue him. And I didn't care for the story very much, but you can definitely see his penchant for writing sort of smarty pants type of characters, and also you can see what will later become a really witty and clever type of writing. And so by the time you get to the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, which was several books later, and is one of my favorites of his. I think this was the second to the last, it was the third to last book he published. Most recently he published How to Sell a Haunted House. Then right before that was The Final Girl Support Group. And then right before that was this one. However, The Final Girl Support Group I don't count because it was actually written before Horror Store, which was like one of the first novels he wrote. So, and he was just writing How to Sell a Haunted House. And so they asked him to give them something to publish in between, so he gave them that old novel. So it doesn't count in the line of publication, in my opinion. But anyways, by the time you get to this one, fantastic. Absolutely fantastic writing. Clever, witty, imaginative. He takes old themes and just does something completely different and new with them. And I absolutely love that about him. That's one of my favorite things about this writer. And that's why I always read every single one of his books that comes out. The next one is The Babylonians. What book did you expect to be impenetrable but found quite easy to sink into? And that is The Rise and Fall of the Dinosaurs by Steve Brusatte. So the reason I never really had a serious interest in paleontology or dinosaurs or fossils at all. If it didn't have anything to do with humans, then I pretty much wasn't, I wasn't not interested, but I was not making any effort to look into that sort of thing. And I got a suggestion for The Rise and Fall of the Dinosaurs on Kindle for only $2.99. And I thought, $2.99, I'll give that a try. So I started this book, and for the first about 100 pages, I was absolutely bored with anything that had to do with the dinosaurs. I was extremely interested in all of the geology and the earth formation that he was talking about, but the dinosaur stuff was boring me, and then I do not know what happened. So I was expecting this book to not be good. I was like, oh, I'm not enjoying this book at all. I don't get why anybody wants to read this. But then all of a sudden, about page 100, it was like a light switch turned on, and the dinosaurs were all of a sudden immensely fascinating, and I was super into this book after that. I just found it So interesting. I can't even describe. I have no words at the moment. I'm starting to get tired. But anyways, yeah, this was just so good, and I did not expect after that first 100 pages to just get so into this book. It actually triggered a whole little dinosaur rampage of books for me. You can see right over there, I have a whole like lineup. You can't see them all, but I have a lineup of all these paleontology books that I picked up after I read this one. And then the next prompt is the Persians. How do you organize your bookshelves? I organize mine by genre because when I have a mood for a book, if it's not author or series specific, which it generally isn't, it's the genre. So I want all of my genres grouped together so that I can just go to one shelf and pick out what book I want to read in the genre that is striking my mood at the time. The next prompt is Ishango bone of Middle Stone Age Central Africa. How does the length of a work affect your reading experience? It doesn't. It doesn't at all. I don't care how long or short it is. If it's a book I'm in the mood to read at that moment, I pick it up and read it. The Huns. How do you read/pack books while traveling? Well, in the older days, I would just throw whatever I was reading into my suitcase and bring it along with me in physical form. But now I have take my Kindle out of the case. Now I have a Kindle. So I just pack my Kindle and I don't take any physical books with me. I have two reasons for that. Number one, I don't want to ding up my books by traveling with them. And then my second reason is for every time I travel, I always check all the bookstores because there are no bookstores where I live. The nearest mediocre bookstore is an hour and a half away. And then the next good bookstore is 4 hours away. So I always check the bookstores everywhere I go, and then I end up cramming my suitcase full of whatever books I buy to take home with me. So I don't want to have books I'm currently reading taking up space in my suitcase. The next one is the Aurignacian Culture. What are your favorite pop culture references to ancient cultures? So I could not think of a single pop culture reference for this prompt. So I decided to just go with movies that are kind of in the realm of pop culture. The first one would be Prometheus. I really loved the first and second Alien movies and didn't like the ones after that. But then Prometheus came out, which is a prequel, and I absolutely loved that. I thought it was so good. So Prometheus is the first movie I'm choosing for that. And then the next one would be Caveman, which is a really old, really stupid and funny movie that I watched when I was a kid and that I absolutely loved when I was in elementary school. So I was like 10 or something when I watched this. And it has Ringo Starr that you can say he's a pop culture icon, right? I think. Can't the Beatles be considered pop culture? So anyways, yeah, Caveman with Ringo Starr. And then the final tag is the Minoans. Establish trade routes and tag some booktubers. So now it's been so long since I was tagged for this, and I did watch a rash of these, and I cannot remember who has and has not done this one. So I'm not really going to tag anybody specifically, but if you haven't done this tag, I think it's a really good one. Even though it did take me a second or two to figure out a couple of the prompts, what they meant. So yeah, if you haven't done it, just consider yourself tagged.